So you want to make a chicken pot pie, but you don't have chicken, you don't have a pot, and you don't have a pie. I recommend apple. Hey guys, welcome back to TutsByKai. I'm Kai, and today we're back once again taking a look at how to make, or not how to make, actually today is a special day because I wanted to finally do a everything, well not everything, but the bulk of things you're going to need to know to get started in Blender. So the first thing we're going to do is when you open up the program, you're going to be visited with this screen. So this main area you have right here, this whole area right here, this whole big old box, this is the viewport. It's the view space, it's the workspace, whatever you want to call it. This is where you're going to do all of your work. So you have the lamp here. If you left click this, you have the lamp here, you have a cube here, and you have the camera. If you left click all of these things, you can see you have all of these different items here to start with. This is the default scene in Blender when you open it up, obviously. Up at the top, you have File, Edit, Render, Window, Help, all these things. And then you have these different tabs. These different tabs are kind of like different workspaces. So if you see here on the right, you have all these panels and whatnot. So up at the top here, you can kind of go through these and you don't have to change the GUI yourself. It's kind of like presets of workspaces that'll help you work a bit quicker and a bit faster sometimes, depending on how much you need to use these specific spaces. So you have sculpting, UV editing, texture painting, shading. You have all these cool things. You have animation, rendering, compositing, geometry nodes, and scripting. Obviously, all these things are like super in depth, and I'll go into some of these in a bit later. But for right now, just need to know that they're there, and these are all different like workspaces you could use that help you work a bit faster. So let's go back to layout. Layout's the default workspace. Down at the bottom, you have the timeline. So if I put my cursor over top of this little line here, you can kind of drag it up and open it up a little bit so you can see what's going on here. You can open it as much as you want, but probably just about this much is fine. So you have this this little scroll bar here. This is like a playhead. So if you've ever used like a DAW for music, or if you've ever seen like you ever look at the bottom of a movie, if you're watching it on like a streaming platform, you pause it and you have that little bar down there and it goes across, says how long until the movie's done. That's basically what this is. So you have this little play button, you have this reverse play button, and then you have like fast forward a little bit to jump to a keyframe, the next keyframe that you have in the animation, which we don't have any keyframes, so it's not going to jump to anything. And then you have this button right here, which is jump to the last frame, which it'll do right there. The start and end frames is on 1, and the end frame is on 250. So this is so if you want to view this in seconds instead of in frames, hit this little view button and go to show seconds. Now you can see you have all these different things that show you seconds. So this is 1 second right here, and then it goes all the way until the end. And 250 frames is approximately 10 seconds and 10 milliseconds. So there you go with that. Now you can change it back to that by hitting view, show seconds. Boom, easy. Now let's say you want to go ahead and take a look at this these panels on the right hand side here. So these panels on the right hand side are very important. The one on the top is the outliner or the outlier or whatever you want to call it, whatever. Same thing. So you have everything that's in your scene will show up over here. So we have the camera, we have the cube, and we have the light. If you left click all of these, it'll show you. Now we have all these three things set up in a collection, and collections are basically like groups. So think of them like cliques in high school. You got the jocks, you got the Valley Girls or whatever. You have the skaters, you know what I mean? You got all those. That's basically a collection. So it's like a group of things. And in this case, the default scene comes with 3 things in a group, which is the camera, the cube, and the light, obviously. So now, if you were to double click these, you can rename them. So you can name this cheerleaders. Yeah, nice. And if you want to rename the camera, you can do that as well. You can name him Joe, because why not? He seems like a Joe. And then you can go ahead and right click these, do the same thing. So you can copy them, paste them, delete them, select them, all this stuff, and you can also just move your cursor off that to get out of that GUI. Each one of these has a little drop down. Nothing too crazy about this. You don't have to worry about this too much. This is more of like an advanced kind of thing-ish to a degree. So just all this stuff is fine. Now, if you go to the right-hand side, you have this eyeball and the camera icon. Now, these 2 icons are very important in some specific situations. Now, if you click the eyeball, it will remove it from the scene. So you see how the cube is disappearing when I click the eyeball. If you hit the camera, seemingly nothing will change, but if you were to render this, then it would be gone. So let's turn on the camera and go on. Let's turn on the cube, so make sure you can see it in the camera. Hit render, render image. Now you can see when we render this, it renders the cube. So this is our camera's point of view. It's looking at the cube. This is what it is like. It's like, boom, look at me. I'm a Vogue model. Nice. It looks good, right? So the camera's looking at it right there. Boom. Now if you want to see what the camera's looking at before you render it, hit 0 on your numpad. Then that'll instantly take us into what the camera is seeing. Everything in this orange box is everything the camera is seeing, and everything outside of it, in this darker area, the camera is not seeing that. But it's letting us see that because, you know, you might want to see what's off the camera, you know, to animate things or whatever. So the only thing that is showing is the things inside of this yellow box right here. So there you go. Now, if I were to go ahead and uncheck this little camera icon right here, boom, and then hit render again, you can see, oh, if I were to go ahead and unclick the camera icon, there we go, and the little viewport icon, you can see that if I was to go to render this, it says disable and renders. Globally disable and renders, shift to set children. So the children, don't worry about that. You don't have to worry about the children at all. But if I were to go ahead and do that now, oops, we've got rid of the camera, not the cube. That's why it didn't work. If I was to go ahead and turn the camera off, there we go. That was Joe is the camera. You want to keep? Let's rename the cube to John, so I know what that is, so I don't accidentally hide the camera again. So now we have to make sure the camera's on. The cube is John. Make sure that is off. I was wondering why that didn't work. Hit render image, and you can see that the cube is now gone. There we go. So with that done, you can see that we can turn the camera back on for the cube, and now we render it again. Boom, it's there. So it's an easy way to get rid of something in your scene without having to delete it. Essentially is what I'm trying to tell you. So if you want to pan around your scene, like I'm doing right now, click the middle mouse button. So the scroll wheel, you know, the scroll wheel, the thing that if you scroll, it zooms in and out. The thing that if you scroll on a web page, it makes you go up and down. Yeah, that thing. Click that and then drag your mouse, and then you'll pan around the scene like that. So click the middle mouse button, click the scroll wheel in, and then you can pan around the scene. Now, if you want to zoom in, obviously just scroll the mouse wheel in and out. And if you want to move around like this, then click the middle mouse button. So hold down the scroll wheel. So click and hold it down, and then hold down Shift on your keyboard, and you can pan around this way, which is also very, very useful. There we go. Now, if you want to also zoom in like this, hold down Control and hold the middle mouse button. So click and hold the middle mouse button down and hold Control. That's another way to move around as well instead of scrolling like this. But yeah, so that is basically all of the directional movement kind of things you need to know. So this is, once again, this is Shift and clicking and holding the middle mouse button. This is just the middle mouse button being clicked and held down. This is scrolling the middle mouse button. And then this is Control and holding the middle mouse button down and moving my mouse forwards and backwards. There we go. So that is all of the kind of movement strats that you need to know. Now, with all of that said and done, something else I want to talk about is this bottom section down here. So this panel down here is very important, very important. This first tab you have here, this is kind of like the regular selection box. It's just anything you select, it will have properties for that said object. It's not the most useful thing in the world. You probably won't use this panel too much, but this panel right here, the second panel, which is the render properties panel, this one's very important because you can change the render engine. So Blender at the current moment has well, technically three, but two workspace engines, render engines, which is Eevee and Cycles. Workbench is used sometimes, but primarily you're probably going to hear about Eevee and Cycles the most. So you can change this to Cycles, and the difference is a very advanced, different kind of video thing, but the only difference, the biggest difference between Cycles and Eevee is that Eevee is a real-time rendering engine. So what that means, if I was to want to see exactly what my scene looked like in this workspace without having to render it, I'll be able to do that in real time, and it would look basically exactly the same. But in Cycles, it wouldn't be as high quality of a render image before I was to actually render it out. So I wouldn't be able to see exactly what it looked like. That doesn't necessarily make Cycles, Eevee a better render engine. It just does a lot more, and Cycles does some things that Eevee doesn't do, and Eevee does some things that Cycles doesn't do. So for the most part, I always stick to Eevee for the types of tutorials that I make here on the channel. But yeah, you can definitely go ahead and play back and forth with the differences between them, and I'll probably do a more in-depth video on Eevee versus Cycles in the future. But for now, let's just stick to Eevee. We have the sampling tab. We have ambient occlusion, bloom, depth of field, subsurface scattering, screen space, reflections, motion blur, all this stuff down here. And all these are very useful, especially depending on what kind of scene you're doing. So the render, the sampling, obviously, the render means it's going to have 64 samples. So what's that mean? What that means is it's going to try and clear the image up essentially 64 times. So it has 64 samples, which means it's going to try and make the image clear 64 times every single frame. So if you want the viewport to match that 64 times, which is probably not a good idea because it's going to lag quite a bit more and it'll take a longer time to kind of process, then you would change the 16 up to 64. But for now, obviously the viewport is fine at 64. We don't have to make it any clearer. It's fine the way that it is. Ambient occlusion is exactly what it is. So if you know what ambient occlusion is, I'm going to hit Shift A, and what we're going to do is we're going to add in a new mesh. So I'm going to hit Shift A, and we're going to search for a mesh plane. I'm going to hit S to scale this upwards. Now you can see we have a plane here. I can S and I move my mouse to scale this bad boy up. Now what I'm going to do is if we turn on ambient occlusion, and if we were to open this up, you can see it doesn't do anything to our scene. That's because up at the top right here, we have a couple buttons. We'll get into these other ones over here, but for now, let's only talk about these 4 buttons. These 4 buttons are the viewport shading buttons. So anything that you do in the scene, anything that you want to render, anything you want to take a look at, that's going to be like your final image or video, you're going to want to go to rendered viewport shading, which is the one all the way on the right here. If you want to just see the wireframes, click the one all the way on the left so you can see the wireframes of every object in your scene. So the cube, the plane, and if you wanted the solid viewport shading, which is what the default is, you're just seeing the objects. You're not seeing the color of them. You're not seeing the material on them. You're not seeing the texture on them. You're only seeing a gray overlay over top of all of the images, over top of all of the meshes, and everything in your scene will just be solid gray like this. So if you want to go to the material viewport shading, you'll see everything looks basically the same, but let's say that we were to go and give this a material, it would look different. So just for the sake of explaining that, let's select the cube, go to the material tab here, and now you can see we have this little drop down. So this is the tab that we add materials to everything in our scene. So if we select our cube here, and go to the material tab, you'll see that this already has a material because it was given one by default when we created the scene. The plane, however, since we added the plane ourselves, does not have a material. So if I was to hit this little drop down box right here while selecting the plane, you'll see this little material option. This material is the material that is on the cube. So let's just go ahead and call this cube so we don't get confused. Now if we go back to the plane and try and open this again, you'll see this is the material. So if we want our plane and our cube to have the same material, we would just click this cube, this little cube option, and then it would be the same exact material. Now let's go ahead and select the cube, change the base color, which is the color that the object is, to like a reddish color like this. So you can see instantly, because we're in material viewport shading, it will show us the material instantly. So we get to see that it's red, we get to see exactly what color it is, we get to see all of these values down here that we'll get to in a moment, but you can see that the plane is not the same color because it's not using the same material. Now if we go ahead and hit this little drop down and select cube, you can see it instantly changes to that material. Now if we change this base color, it'll change both of the materials, both of the objects that we have that one material on, so the cube and the plane. That's exactly what we need though. But let's say you want the cube to be a different color than the material, okay? Let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's change this little material on the plane by hitting this little 2 button. This little 2 button right next to the material will create a second version of this material. So boom, great, you've done it. Now you have one that says cube 0.001. Nice, I'm proud. That means that you've duplicated the material and now we have the ability to change the color or the attributes accordingly without having to worry about changing the cube. So let's go ahead and call this plane. Nice. We can change the base color now. If we change the base color to a blue, it'll change only the plane, which is nice. So we'll take a side step from all of these other attributes right now. We'll go ahead and go back to ambient occlusion. So as you can see, ambient occlusion is essentially when 2 objects kind of touch each other, and it creates a shadow between those 2 to kind of make more detail between them. So if I was to go ahead and turn ambient occlusion on, you can see that there's a very faint little shadow that's happening when on the collision between the cube and the plane. Boom, look at that. There you go. So if you want to make this a little bit more, you can turn the distance up slightly. So you can turn it up to like maybe 3, like that. You can see that we have a nice shadow between those. The higher you turn it up, the darker it'll get, and the lower you go, the softer it'll get because it's spreading out. The distance is basically the size of the ambient occlusion, as you can see. So if I was to go ahead and make it bigger, it would get bigger. If I was to make it smaller, it would be smaller. So if we leave it to about somewhere right there, which is about maybe 0.9 or just 1 in general, you can see it's a very nice effect. It's a very subtle effect, but it's a very nice effect. Bloom is exactly what you think it is. So it's anything that's really bright, it will just have this little fog glow around it. So you can see because our blue color is kind of bright, if we turn bloom on, it kind of gets like a little foggy in here. So if we turn the intensity up, you can see it gets even more foggy. There you go. And then if I turn the radius up, it gets bigger. As you can see, it's kind of, glowing now a little bit. And then if we turn the threshold down, it'll start glowing even more. So play around with these values and get something that you like if you're trying to get something to glow. If you only want some like really bright things to glow, let's go ahead and add in real quick. Let's add in a plane. Hit G. G is how you move everything. So if I wanted to move this little plane inside of the cube, hit G, and then I'll just move it over here by moving my mouse and then left clicking. If I was to right click, it would just snap back to where it was and cancel everything that I just did. All the movement, it would cancel it. If I hit G and then move it over here and left click, you can see that it will then leave the plane wherever I left clicked, which is what we want. More basic movement tools. If you tap R on your keyboard, you can rotate things, but it rotates in a weird way. So if you double tap R, it'll rotate freely. If you right click, it'll cancel that movement once again. If you hit R to rotate and then hit X to rotate it on the X axis, which is that little red line you see going through everything. If I was to move it around, it would only rotate on the X axis. So it would flip around like some kind of like, little paddle, or some kind of wheel or cog or whatever you want to say. If I hit Z, it'll spin on the Z axis when I hit R to rotate. So R, Z, it'll rotate on the Z axis. If I hit R, Y, it'll rotate on the Y axis. And you can see all of these different things. So if I hit Z, it'll do this. If I hit X, it'll do this. And if I hit Y, it'll do that. Keep in mind you have to hit R first. So once again, hit R and then hit Y. There you go. Rotate on the Y axis. And then hit X, hit Z. And it'll rotate on all those different axes. Very cool. Hit delete to get rid of anything. But as you can see, I want that back because we need to do the emission thing that I'm talking about where I make it really bright. So hit Control Z to undo it. So if you ever want to undo something you've done in Blender, hit Control Z and it will undo whatever you just did and it'll put it back in the scene. So let's say, like I said, I want to make this really bright. So I want because I want the bloom to really make this little square bright. So bloom is just going to make it glow a lot. So let's go to the material tab here with this plane selected. Hit New to create a new material. Now we've created a new material now, which is good. So I'm going to call this glowing. Nice. So what we're going to do here is we can leave this as a principal BSDF shader. A principal BSDF shader is basically just a color. It's essentially just a node or a material type of material that gives us a lot of options. So both of these colors, so the red material that we have on the cube and the blue material we have on this plane are both principal BSDF shaders, which is just like I said. It gives you the base color. It gives you all of these options down here. It's a very versatile shader or material. So I don't want that for this plane because I want it to glow. So I want it to emit light. So the way to fix that is we need to change it off of principal BSDF. So let's go ahead and hit this little button. And this will open up all of the different shader options that we have. So you can see we have background, diffuse. Diffuse is basically just principal BSDF, but it just has less options. Emission, which is what we're going to use. We have glass, glossy, hair, holdout, all these different things that we'll get into, and all these different things that mean something else that we probably won't have time to visit every single one of these, but let's go ahead and go to the emission shader. The emission shader will make it so that it glows. Now, if I were to turn the strength up, you can see that it starts glowing even brighter than it was before. So now because we have bloom turned on, you can see that that is glowing quite substantially more than anything else in the scene because everything else in the scene isn't really that bright. This is very bright though, so it's on strength of 25. Let's put it on 25. It has a strength of 25, which means it's very bright, and because we have bloom on, it is making it glow. If we turn bloom off, you can see it doesn't glow anymore. It's just solid white. So if we turn bloom back on, it does that. As you can see, that is the bloom shader, the bloom option or setting or post effect or whatever you want to call it. Depth of field is semi-explanatory, but you don't really turn it on right here. The way you turn depth of field on is you hit 0 to go into the camera's view. You select the camera by clicking it or clicking it over here in the outliner. We just tap Joe. There he is, right? Our homie Joe, the bestie Joe. Love that guy. We go to the camera tab here, and then we go to depth of field. Now you can open this up here and check it on. Make sure it's checked on. And you can see that when you turn this on, if I was to go ahead and turn the f-stop down, things get kind of blurry. You can see back here it's blurry and up close it's blurry. If we turn it on and off, you can see the difference here. It gets kind of blurry, Crazy. Now, the way to kind of judge where you want to be clear is to change the focus distance. So if I move this around, you can see certain aspects get clear. Like, for instance, if I want the tip of this thing to be clear and all this to be blurred back here, I would move the focus distance until it's clear. So the same thing with this over here, the cube. The cube is now in focus. This little piece right here, anyway. This little tip, yeah, it's in focus. Now I want the blue thing back there to be in focus. The blue tip back way in the back up here. That's in focus now. So you can see you can manipulate the the focus by turning the focus distance to different values and changing the f-stop up and down. Having an f-stop of 0.1 is very, very low, obviously, so you can change that around. But if we were to go back to the main tab, this main tab here kind of just explains some of the details about it. We don't necessarily need to get into for you to be able to use depth of field right now. So let's go ahead and go to subsurface scattering. Subsurface scattering, the same thing. Screen space reflections, it kind of makes it so that everything that's in the scene reflects off of each other if it's shiny. So you can see when I turn this on, you can see this, look at this cube here. It's kind of like all solid red, but when I turn it on, it's reflecting the blue color onto the cube. So that's kind of cool. If we were to select the cube here, go to the material tab right here, all of these values we were talking about are about to come back into play. So if I turn the specular up on this, you can see that it gets more or less shiny, which will make the screen I can't speak today, which will make the screen space reflections reflect more. So if we turn the specular all the way down, it'll have nothing. If we turn it all the way up, it'll have a lot of reflection. As you can see, it's very shiny. When we pan around, it's very shiny. You can see we have all of these little reflections here on the side right here. Take a look at that. All those reflections there. Looks very, very cool. Now, metallic is the same thing. It kind of just makes everything look metallic, which is very cool if you're doing some kind of specific thing. Roughness, if I turn metallic all the way, if roughness is obviously exactly what it sounds like, it just makes the object or surface look more rough than what it is. So if we turn it all the way up, it won't reflect anything. If we turn it all the way down, the reflections will be crystal clear. Very cool. Now, if you're in solid viewport shading, you're only going to be able to see the gray we were talking about. If you're in material viewport shading, you can see all the things we're seeing right now. Now, you can see if I look at this, there's like a little tree and a sky in the reflection here. Why is that? Now, if I go to the rendered viewport shading, all of that disappears. There's none of that. You don't have any of that here, and it kind of looks way different than the material viewport shading does. This is material viewport shading, and this is rendered. You can see we have shadows now. You can see that we don't have that tree, and everything's a lot darker. Why is that? If we go back to material viewport shading, this little drop down box, you can see we have this thing that's like a little HDRI, and HDRI is basically just like a sphere that's lighting the scene. So essentially what Blender does in material viewport shading is it takes an image and then it uses that to light the scene in material viewport shading. So if we click this and we try to change it to another one of these environments, you can see that the entire scene kind of changes around. You can see that the colors kind of change, the brightness changes, the level of clarity in the object changes, because now all these things are different. Now, if we go ahead and turn the rotation, you can see it kind of rotates the image, the image that's lighting the scene. If we turn the roto opacity up, you can see we can actually see the scene now. So this is what Blender's doing. It's emitting this image onto our scene in material viewport shading. So that's pretty cool stuff. Now, if you turn blur down, you can see the image fully and clearly. So this is kind of like some kind of studio that it's giving us, so we can light our scene with the studio. It's this one right here. This one's like a forest path, I guess. Yeah, that looks pretty sweet. And then we have this one, which is like a waterfront and like a building or something. I guess that's my house. And then we have some other ones, but you can see we can rotate these. Oh, we can rotate these by hitting this little rotation thing and rotating them around. I made myself seasick. And then we have the strength, which makes it brighter or darker. And then we have, of course, the blur once again, which is very cool stuff. Now, if we go to rendered viewport shading, all this disappears because it's no longer using that to light the scene. It's using the lamp and the lamp alone to light the scene. So if we select the lamp and hit delete, everything gets dark. Why? Because now we don't have anything to light the scene with. So hit Shift D, put that lamp back, and that is that. Now, all these other things that we have here in this main tab, like motion blur, all these things are a little bit more advanced things that you don't necessarily need to know right now to get the basics down. So we're going to go ahead and move on to something more important. Now, like I said earlier, we added this little plane. So to add objects in Blender, what you're going to do is hit Shift A. We did this earlier to add in a mesh plane. Now, if you see, we have a lot of different options here. We have camera, speaker, empty image. Image is not by default. Image is actually an add-on that you can get, and I'll show you how to do that in a second as well. So you can add in some text. You can add in, you don't need to worry about curves necessarily right now. Those are a little bit more advanced of things, but you can add in some meshes, which is like some UV spheres, some icospheres, some cylinders, cones, this monkey head, which is a famous monkey head. So hit G to move this up. This is Suzanne. So say hello to Suzanne. Go back to material viewport shading. This is Suzanne. She's a monkey. She's just like a cool thing. Like, you can see she has all these like vertices and all these faces and all these planes and stuff. Let's say you want to go ahead and edit this. You want to make her like a different shape or something. So to edit any object in Blender, if you hit Tab on your keyboard, it'll open this up like this. So to make everything orange, and it'll like show these little dots. So if you click one of these dots and then hit G to move it, you can move this point around. So this is grabbing a single vertice and moving this vertice around. So you can give her like a little pimple, I don't know. And if you hit tab again, you can go out of edit mode and you can select the entire object again instead of only selecting a single vertice. So hit G to move it around, you can move the whole thing now instead of just moving that one vertice. There you go. Now there you go. Now there's a lot of different hotkeys and a lot of different things you need to know about this little tab edit mode kind of thing, where you can edit these vertices and move them around and stuff. Hit G, select them, left click to select them, hit G to move them around like this. Hit Control Z to undo. There's a lot of things that you would maybe need to know about this little edit mode kind of thing, because there's a lot of tools here that pop up on the left hand side. There's a lot of hotkeys, there's a lot of different combination of buttons you can press, do a lot of different things. But for now, all you need to know is you need to move these vertices around by hitting G, and then doing some cool stuff like this to move things around. Now if you need to, now like I said, for this cube, maybe I want to hit tab to go into edit mode to grab the cube, hit this little vertice right here, select that one, hit G and move it up, and now you have like a little misshapen cube, which is kind of cool. You know, he's a little pointy on the edge. Maybe he's going through a bad day. Maybe he's having a bad time right now. So maybe he's a little pointy today. He's a little sharp, you know. He's a little spicy. Control Z. There we go. It's like it never even happened. It's gone. We just undid it. Now, nice. So something else I want to touch on in this video before we start to move on is how to take a look. I'm gonna take a look at the rest of these menus over here on the right hand side, and I also want to teach you how to split windows. So let's say I want to have a different window open. Let's say I want more than one workspace. Maybe I'm tired of only working in this one little area. So if you put your cursor up to the top left, or the top right, or the bottom right, or the bottom left, you can see that it'll turn into a little crosshair, a little first-person shooter little crosshair, like, you know, you're playing some kind of game or something. Now, if you go ahead and left-click this and then click and drag it over into the scene, you can see that it has made two windows here. Now, if you middle mouse button click, if you click the middle mouse button, the scroll wheel, if you click that in, you can see you can move around this scene, and it won't affect the other scene. You can also go ahead and go up to the top, scroll up to the top, hit this little button right here. This little button is the editor type. So this is saying what kind of viewport you want to use, what kind of viewport you want in your view right now. So if you click this, you can see it opens up all these different options. You have the UV editor, the image editor, the compositor, the shader editor, the timeline, the dope sheet, all these things that might not make sense right now. And these are basically the custom versions. Like, this is you doing it on your own instead of going up here to the top. So you can see the top up here, they have different windows like this right here. This is the different one. This is the UV image editor on the left and the workspace on the right. So this is basically, if we go back to layout, this is basically you creating your own. So let's go ahead and go to the left-hand side and hit editor type and change it to UV image editor. There we go. So now you can see, if we go back to UV editing up at the top, it's the same thing. We just made the same exact layout. It's just we did it on our own instead of using one of these presets up at the top. Now, using one of the presets is sometimes nicer because it lets you know where everything is. It doesn't change everything. Because like I said, over here on the left-hand side, you can see some things a little different too. It kind of moves this up. It changes some things around. But yeah, so you can go ahead and do it on your own. You customize it. You know, you can make a different one. So if you put your cursor into the corner and pull up again, you can pull up and to the left. If you were to go ahead and change this, you can change this to the shader editor, and then you can look at all the nodes. So this is the Principled BSDF shader. You can see this is all like kind of tying together. So this is where we can change everything without having to go to the material tab. It's the same thing. You see the material tab and the shader editor. This node is the Principled BSDF shader. It's like the same exact thing. All the values are still here. You can click this tab off of the right hand side by putting your cursor on the little edge and then just moving it over. And you can see this is all of the nodes that we have here, which is, we only have one because this is only the Principled BSDF shader that's hooked up into the cube. But yeah, so you can change, if you go back to the material viewport shading, you can change the specular and it'll change the actual cube. That's pretty cool. Now let's say you opened up a bit too many windows. You need to close them a little bit. You opened up a little too many things. Let's go ahead and put our cursor back into the corner of one of the edges here. And instead of dragging into the workspace like this and then being able to change it to something else like this, put your cursor into the top corner or the bottom corner or wherever, and then drag into the one that you want to get rid of. So I'm going to drag this upwards because I want to get rid of the timeline. So then we go ahead and when you release, it'll get rid of it. Same thing again. Let's put our cursor into the top right or top left. Drag your cursor up into the thing you want to get rid of, and then get rid of it. So let's say I want to get rid of the node editor over here. So all of this area is the node editor. I want to get rid of this. I don't like the shader editor. I don't want this anymore. I'm done with it. Put your cursor over here into the workspace, put it up into the corner, either the top or the bottom, and then click and drag to the left because you want to get rid of it. So I want the workspace to take over the material shader window. So just let go, and then boom, it's gone. It's gone. It's no more. It's not in your life anymore. It's gone. It's completely out of here. It's done. So with all that done, let's go ahead and really quickly, let's go ahead and look at the tabs on the right hand side, and then we should call this video quits, because that is basically everything you need to know almost to get started in Blender. So let's go ahead. And you have a couple tabs over here. This is like a very important tab. This is the output properties tab. So this is essentially where you're going to change the resolution of your scene. So if I hit 0 to go into the camera's view once again, oh, I forgot we still have depth of field on. If I change the resolution over here, you can see that it'll change the shape of the camera. So it's going to make conform the camera to the resolution that I want to use. So essentially, if you want a regular resolution, you go 1920 by 1080. 1280, 720, or 800 by 600, or whatever you want to say. So all of those different resolutions that people always use: 2560, 1440 for 2K, and so on. 4096 and whatever the 4K resolution is, 2560, whatever it is. So that's that. So if I want to change this back to what it was, I would go 1920 by 1080. This little percent means it's like the render resolution of the resolution. So if I put it on 50%, it's gonna divide our resolution in half. So it'll make it like less to render. It won't be as high quality, but it won't be as much to render. So I just recommend keeping that all the way on 100. So then your resolution is intact and it won't look scuffed or weird when it comes out. Now the other thing you're gonna want to take a look at is the frame rate. So the frame rate of your scene depends on how many frames is in each second. So if you go and you open this up, you can see you have 23.98, 24, 25, 30, 60, and 240 in custom. So every single frame, every second is gonna have like 24 frames in that second. So FPS stands for frames per second, so 24 frames per second. And if you change it to 60, it'll be a lot smoother because there's 60 frames in every single second. I'm assuming you guys know this, but hopefully if you don't, then I'm explaining it right now. So there you go. So if you want to change it to 60, the animation will be much smoother, but it'll also be faster. So you have to like space everything out. Now let's go ahead and I'll show you what I mean. So if I go ahead and have this, maybe I want Suzanne. Let's get rid of Suzanne. Let's make the cube. Get rid of this plane too. Let's make the cube move around. So if I hit if I hit 7 on my numpad to go to the top view, I can move this around and I won't have to worry about putting it under the cube on accident. So hit G, move it around. You can see it, and it'll never go underneath the cube. It'll stay exactly on the level that it's at. If I was to do this in the 3D space, you can see if I hit G, it'll move it down and up and all across and all over the place. So hit 7 on your numpad to go to the top facing view. You can also go to the front facing view, which is 1, and you can also go to the side facing view, which is 3. So front view, side view, top view. Nice. So hit G to move it around. Now I'm going to go ahead and move the cube over here to the bottom left. I'm going to put my cursor into the timeline down here and hit I to insert. I'm going to put my cursor back up here into the workspace and hit I to insert a keyframe. This keyframe is going to be a location keyframe, because I want to insert a keyframe saying this is the location of the cube. It's right here. This is where I want it to be. I want to move my cursor, my playhead, to frame 100. Hit G, move it up to the top right. Hit I, location. I'm going to go ahead and put my timeline all the way back and hit play. You can see that because we're on 60 frames a second, it looks super, super smooth. I'm also going to make my in frame 100, so I don't have to keep looping this manually. So I'll put my in frame to 100. Now you can see it loops as soon as it gets to 100. Now, if I was to change the frame rate to 24, you can see it's a lot slower and it's a lot choppier. This is what films are usually in: 24, 23, 25, stuff like that. If I change to 60, that's typically what, like, gaming videos on YouTube are set to, or anything where 60 frames per second matters, like slow-mo videos or something like that. It looks much more smooth. It looks much less choppy than something like 24 or 25, obviously. So 30 is also a nice medium. 30 looks decent, but like I said, 60 is much smoother, and it also looks faster because it is moving a little faster, because there's 60 frames in every single second. So there we go. That is, it looks much smoother. There we go. That's all I wanted to say. Now this output is very important as well. I had videos specifically on output properties in Blender, So if you change the file format, you can see we have a bunch of different things: BMP, PNG, JPEG, all these different things you can change to AVI, RAW, FFmpeg video. This is basically just what format you want to render your video or image to once you render it. Now this little folder icon will open up your folders, and you can choose where you want to render something to. So you can change this to your pictures folder by hitting this little folder, and it'll open up the thing that says, hey, where do you want this to go? It'll open up like a little file dialog option, and you can send it to a folder in your pictures folder called My Pictures, and then it'll render to My Pictures in your pictures folder. That's very cool. RGB, black and white, and RGBA. Essentially, this is black and white, red, green, blue, which stands for I can't even speak. Holy crud. Red, green, blue, which stands for RGB. RGB stands for red, green, blue, and then RGBA, which is red, green, blue, alpha. So the alpha means it'll be transparent. But the only way to make something transparent is to click this transparency, and then go to the output tab here, the tab we were in before. Go down to film, and then check transparency. If transparency is not checked, then it won't be transparent. Now, if we go to the render viewport tab, you can see that we have this little checkers back here now. If we uncheck transparent, it'll just be gray. So if you're seeing these checkers when you go to render viewport shading up here at the top right, then it will be transparent when you render the image or the video or the movie, whatever you're doing. So if we go back to, the output properties here, you can see that none of the rest of this really matters. The color management doesn't matter, but in the main tab here, if you go to color management, something that I always do, this is just a cute little tip. If it's by default, it's on Filmic. So if you change it from Filmic to standard, the colors will kind of change and be their actual colors. Filmic kind of puts a little tint overlay over top of everything, and if I put it to standard, it'll be the actual color that I made it. You have other ones like Filmic Log, Raw, and then False Color, which is like whoa. But if you change it back to Filmic, it'll be the default. If you change it to standard, it'll be the actual colors that you set, which are usually more harsh. So people usually like to keep it on Filmic, but yeah, so that's just a little quick thing that I always talk about. So yeah, there we go. That's basically, I think, everything that I needed to say. You have other tabs here, like you can add modifiers to this cube by, if I pause this, you can add modifiers to this cube. So let's say you wanted to add like a wave modifier. This wave modifier will make it so that, let's delete these keyframes. If I select these two keyframes, hit delete, it'll get rid of these keyframes. If your cursor is up here in the workspace and you try to change something in the timeline, let's say it's up here, if I hit delete, it won't delete anything. It'll delete the cube. So I have to put my cursor down here to make sure that it deletes the keyframes. Now, with that being said, if your cursor is over here in the right-hand side and you hit tab, it also won't do anything. I'm pressing tab and it won't do anything. But if you put your cursor over here in the workspace and hit tab, it'll put you into edit mode like we did earlier. You can move around these vertices. So your cursor has to be wherever you want to edit something. So if you want to edit something down here, make sure your cursor's down here. If you want to edit something up here, make sure your cursor's in this space. That's a big thing that a lot of beginners to Blender always miss. They're like, why isn't it doing it? Why? Oh, that's not the same button. I'm doing what you're doing. That's why, because your cursor might not be in the same place that it needs to be. So that's also something. Now this wave modifier, if I play, it'll make it so that the cube kind of bounces. Like if we delete this, it'll stop. If we add it back, then it'll keep going. Now, the cool thing about this is that this is just one modifier that you can do. There's many other ones. Obviously, you don't need to use all of these right now, obviously, but we can do one of the biggest ones is subdivision surface. It'll make it it'll subdivide whatever the object is you're using, which means it'll give it more vertices than it had before, which will smooth it out, make it round. So if I turn the levels up, it'll add more and more vertices, as you can see. So if I turn it down, it'll have that many. If I keep turning it up, it'll keep subdividing it and keep dividing it until it has so many that it looks really smooth. Now let's say that you're about to this point right here, and you say that you don't want it to be chunky like this. It looks kind of chunky, and the reason it looks chunky is because if you go up to Object, you can turn shade smooth on. So this is on shade flat. So every single vertex and every face, it's making it look flat like a board, which is why you see all these like all these little things. So if you go up to Object and change it to shade smooth, it'll smooth all that out and it'll give you a very, very nice thing. Now obviously the edges are still kind of jagged. So if you turn the level of subdivision surface up, we just turn the cube into a sphere. Now if you go ahead and hit delete on this, it'll get rid of it, and then it'll be flat once again. Now you can change this back to shade flat so that you have those flat edges again, because this is supposed to be flat and not smooth because it's a cube. There we go. Now, one of the last things that I want to talk about is like I said, there's a couple other tabs here that might be very, very nice for you to look at. The shape keys. Shape keys are big, but they're kind of an advanced thing. So I have a video on that separately. If you need to learn anything more in depth, I definitely have more videos on the channel, and I'll be making some more. If there's something that you need to know that you don't know, leave a comment down below, and I will make a tutorial on that topic specifically. But for right now, the last thing that I want to tell you today is I'm going to go ahead and go up to File. Sorry, Edit, and then go up to Preferences. Now, Preferences is a way you can go ahead and change or look at all of the settings of Blender, essentially. So you have the interface, you have all these detailed advanced things. The only thing that I want to tell you right now is you can change the themes. You can do that. You can change presets to different like colors and stuff. And whoa, geez, you can change it to different colors and stuff. But I'm just gonna leave it on what we have right now. I might actually do a different theme for a while. I've been using the default Blender for a long time. But for now, we'll leave it on Blender Duck, which is the default right now. So let's go. The thing I want to tell you about is the add-ons. So add-ons are very, very cool. Now you can add in some cool like plugins or things that make Blender better or add to it. So essentially, we have a lot of different things here. We have the ant landscape, ivy gen, all these things add different cool things that you can use in Blender. Some of them I have enabled, some of them I don't, obviously. Now, if you go ahead and you search for something, like let's say you want to use something called extra objects. Extra objects, there's two different ones here. You have add curve and add mesh. Curves are not something you necessarily need to be worried about right now. It's kind of like just a line that you can use for specific things. It's difficult to explain in a short amount of time, so I won't even get to it. But the thing you need to know about curves is that it's not a mesh. It's kind of like just a line that you can use to attach to things for them to do other things. And you can use them to model with. It's a whole big thing. But objects, you want to add extra objects, you need to add the add mesh. So we click that, check that on right there. You can see it's on. And then you can go down here and hit save preferences, but I have auto save preferences on, so I don't have to worry about that. Hit this little X to get rid of it. And then if you hit Shift A and search to go to mesh, you can see down here we have all these different objects now. We can add in a diamond. Hit that to hit G to move up. You can have all these extra objects now. You can see very, very cool stuff. Now, last thing I want to touch on is if I were to go ahead and add in a cylinder or something, you can see that it has a specific amount of vertices. You can see it has all of these different like lines and stripes here. Down the bottom left, we have this thing that says add cylinder. If I open this up, I can change the amount of vertices to make it more or less. You can see I can add in all these. I can make it super smooth by adding 500, or I can make it super chunky by adding only 10. You can see it makes it like some kind of like tool or nail or something, or it's like some kind of thing. It's very, very hexagonal or octagonal or however many you add. It'll be like that, depending on the amount of vertices you have, obviously. The radius will make it smaller or bigger, or thicker or smaller, obviously. The depth will make it taller, bigger, or it'll make it drink its milk, so it's like bigger and stronger, eat your vegetables and whatnot. But if you were to go ahead and add in, let's say you added in an object like a cylinder, and you wanted to change all these things. Let's go ahead and reset all these values. You want to change all of these things, but you clicked somewhere else first. You clicked off of it, or you moved it. You can now see that when I go down to this tab, it doesn't let me change anything about the cylinder. It only lets me move it around. I can't change anything. So essentially what I'm trying to tell you is that when you add in an object, even if it's a cube, if you want to change the cube in any way, or change the object in any way, like the cone, you can just add the amount of vertices, and you can see I'm making a triangle, and add these vertices here. You can see that you have to do it before you move or click anywhere else. So if I click off of it, then come back to it, those options are gone, and I can't edit it anymore. I only have to be able to move it around. That's all I can do. So if you want to change those kind of options, like you can with the cylinder, like the vertices and the depth and the size and whatnot, you have to do it before you click off of it, because once you click off of it, those options are gone forever until you add that object back. So that is all the basics that I think that I need to explain to you right now, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, if you have something you want me to tell you more in depth, I will tell you about talk about lights for a second. Lights, you have 4 different types of lights. So if I select a lamp here, you have point, sun, spot, and area. So they all kind of are self-explanatory, but if you hit G, you can move the point lamp around. The point lamp is kind of just like, wherever it's next to, it's going to like make bright. The sun lamp acts like a sun. If we change the strength down to 1, you can see it acts like the sun. Whatever direction it's in, it'll shine that direction. No matter where it's at in the scene, it will shine the direction this little line is facing. So if I double tap R, move it around, you can see it'll change the direction, like it's a day-night cycle, So that's pretty cool. Now, spotlight is exactly what you think it is. It's a spotlight. It literally just it shows a cone of wherever it is. Like when you're if you're in a play and you're on stage or something, you can change the size of it, change the blend, make it softer, make it harder. Very, very cool stuff. Move it around, rotate it. It'll be just like a spotlight. Like, oh, where's this guy? Oh, he's being arrested. Where is he? I'm on a helicopter. Pull the vehicle over. Something like that, you know? Area lamps is essentially the same thing as a point lamp. It's just much bigger and much softer, and people tend to like it better, even though it's essentially just a, if I make this bigger, it's essentially just a plane that emits light. So let's go ahead, and if you look at this, you can change the shape to a square and hit S to scale it up. You can see it's just literally just a plane that's emitting light. So if I rotate it, you can see that it is literally just a plane that's emitting light, which is really, really cool stuff. You can hit G to move it around. It's just really soft compared to the point lamp. The point lamp is kind of like, you know, like a point, like a soft thing. This is like, you can make it much bigger, much more powerful. The size can be a lot bigger. As you can see, it'll brighten up a whole bigger, way bigger space than a point lamp would do. The point lamp is like this. It's like much softer. The area lamp is just really good for things like showcases, or if you're trying to light an entire scene or something very softly. It's kind of like a box lamp in real life, but there you go. So that's basically that. You can turn the shadow on and off so it doesn't like show shadows. You can see show shadow here. Turn the shadows on and off. But that's basically it. So like I said, that's all the basics. I just wanted to talk about lamps real quick because lamps are really important to light your scene, obviously. But yeah, so that's all that I wanted to talk about in today's mega long Blender Basics tutorial. But yeah, so I hope you learned something new. You had to have. I said a lot of information in this tutorial. I hope you learned something new. Like I said, if you need to know anything else in specific, do not be afraid to ask me down in the comments below. I'll make a tutorial on it, or if it's very simple, then I'll just respond and explain it to you in the comments down below. I'll see you all in the next video, or I hope you do. If you're new, please subscribe. It helped me a lot. It's literally free, doesn't cost anything. Just hit the subscribe button, and you'll get to know whenever I post a next tutorial. I'll see you all in the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you guys in the next one. But until then, bye-bye.